Just have a few housekeeping announcements before our presenters begin. If you have questions or comments, please raise them in the Q&A box or the group chat, which can be found at the bottom of your screens. WSBA staff are here to support and assist you in your conference experience. WSBA CLE will report your credit hours based on you submitting a credit adjustment form to cle@wsba.org, found in the front pages of the coursebook. Materials for this session, as applicable, may be found in your coursebook. WSBA CLE will report credit hours within 30 days and requests that you submit your credit adjustment immediately following the conclusion of the conference. If you have any questions, contact cle@wsba.org. The coursebook will be updated in the weeks following the conference. This session is being recorded for later replay. And now I would like to present you the presenters, Rob Mead and Barbara Engstrom.
Good morning. Before we start, I'd just like to go just a few other preliminary details. Maren Anderson, our friend and colleague from the Skagit County Law Library, was unable to join us today. She's in the process of changing jobs to join Northwest Justice's outstanding legal information team. So we'll see more of Maren, but not today. So again, please use your Q&A function for questions. We'll be monitoring the chat. Barbara and I are very comfortable sort of riffing off each other, and we'll be taking responsibility for monitoring while the other one's talking, and also throwing in the occasional side comment or quip. We're going to take a very informal approach. Despite the forced formality of the technology, it's strange, Zoom is weird, we're all burned out on it. We're going to make the best of it and jump through the technological hurdles as they come on this Friday the 13th. So although we're going to be talking about the lived experience of Washington's nearly 100,000 agricultural workers today, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking today from my home built on land that was taken from the Nisqually people by the 1854 Treaty of Medicine Creek in exchange for a small reservation, some money, and permanent hunting and fishing rights that took the remarkable advocacy of Billy Frank Jr. a century later to ensure. His statue will be replacing that of Marcus Whitman in the US Capitol this year. Let's follow his example and commit to our advocacy for the long haul, holding one another up during the hard times. And so I'm going to start with a video from Chief Justice Gonzalez asking a question. And so I need to share screen. Share sound. Hit share.
With a demographic population. It wasn't. It made this back in the 1950s.
Let me follow up on that very point. Agricultural work is arduous and dangerous. I think we agree on that. The workers are exposed to heat and cold in the fields, and they labor in geographic isolation. They're less likely to be voters, less likely to speak English as a first language, aren't wealthy, in fact, are among the poorest workers in the nation. They have a shorter life expectancy, a higher incidence of disease and disability, limited access to health care, insurance, and education, less likely to have employer-provided health benefits, higher rates of sexual harassment and assault, higher rates of other exploitation, including financial, higher exposure to toxins, more likely to be people of color, at least now, less likely to have sanitary and stable housing, less likely to have collective bargaining rights, less likely to have lobbyists, less likely to make campaign contributions to elected officials. Would you then still suggest that it's a coincidence that labor laws have consistently excluded them from the protections afforded other workers?
So I think we can agree that that's just brutal questioning, right? It's incredibly effective. The footnotes for every factual assertion that Justice Gonzalez made, could be inches long, but he concisely used factual data to ask a very hard question. And that question was in the context of the Martinez-Cuevas versus DeRuyter Brothers Dairy case, oral argument held on October 24th, 2019. He uses this simple but devastating summaries of statistical information to push his point that it's fundamentally unfair to exclude dairy workers from the right to overtime pay. We're going to focus today using this case as sort of an example of the skill set of finding and using interdisciplinary social science data and economic data in public interest, both civil and criminal law. So my name is Rob Mead. I use the he, his pronouns. I'm the state law librarian for Washington, and I work directly for the Supreme Court. I do have to say that everything I say today is my opinion in my role as a very inside outsider. I do research for the justices and clerks, but I'm not privy to the internal deliberations of the court, nor do I speak for the court. Prior to this position, I was the Deputy Chief Public Defender for New Mexico, where I was deeply involved in the unsuccessful litigation to establish case law standards like Washington's. I was the state law librarian in Santa Fe, academic law librarian at the University of Kansas, University of New Mexico Law Schools. And then early in my career, I was a disability rights attorney doing special ed and Social Security cases. In each of these roles, I've often immersed myself in the treasure hunt of doing economic, sociological, educational, or medical research that I didn't learn how to do in law school. You know, we get taught a specific set of skills in law school that are hard earned for research, how to read cases, how to connect cases to statutes and understand the interplay. Maybe we learn how to use regulations if we're lucky, perhaps even legislative history. And we learn how to read law review articles and perhaps treatises. That's a very limited and yet somewhat ambitious list of skills, of research skills that law students can expect to take away from law school. Very rare that you learn how to dig through census data. It's very rare that you learn to take a look at psychological impairments or statistics or related interdisciplinary research. All of it is very useful in the day-to-day practice. So I'm hoping to do two things today. The first one is to teach a few tricks, but I think more importantly, both Barbara and I are hoping that we can sort of make it second nature to call a law librarian, to get some help, to encourage you to reach out to your law library staff early in the litigation process to help you load for bear early in the hunt. I know firsthand the time and bandwidth pressure that you're facing. So don't rely on Google alone. You're all expert Google users, but there are more efficient ways to find things. Get some professional help, and we're here to help. Okay, so let's go back to the Martinez-Cuevas case. I'm going to share screen again. Barbara, can you see my Supreme Court briefs? Okay, great. So one of the places you can look for information is the court's Supreme Court briefs page. It's often helpful to go back and look at the last time an argument was made. Yeah, there's some new arguments under the sun, but not very many. Lots of these cases sort of cycle through as society changes and get reheard 50 or even 100 years later. And so we look backwards in time often. Electronically, you can go back to 2006. If you need a case or a briefs from a case that's earlier than that, reach out to the state law library. We've got them all the way back. The other place you can get them is state archives. And then they're scattered to some degree at the other law libraries. Brief I want to look at today is from that Martinez-Cuevas versus DeRuyter dairy case. It's a 5-4 decision from 2020. So this decision was heard on an oral argument when Justices Fairhurst and Wiggins were still on the bench. So, but when it was released for publication, they retained, even though they'd retired, they were still part of the decision-making of that decision. And Justices Montoya, Lewis, and Whitener didn't participate. This case examines the constitutionality of RCW 4946-132G, which exempts agricultural workers from the overtime requirement set out in the Washington's Minimum Wage Act. It's a lovely case for teaching because the legal issue in it is on its face relatively simple. Constitutionally, it's pretty complicated. And we just don't have time today to jump into the depth of the interplay in this case between the state and federal Privileges and Immunities Act and the differences in analysis between the federal issues. And to point out also the state's adoption of law from the federal Fair Labor Standards Act, upon which Washington's law is based, and the fact that it's structurally tainted with racism against Black agricultural workers, and that the Federal Privileges and Immunities Clause was hobbled by wrongly decided US Supreme Court decisions. I'd love to take the time, we just don't have it. So there's a lot to this case. It's highly recommended reading. Instead, though, we're going to look at the workplace safety issue. And this, as Justice Madsen explains in her majority opinion in this case, they allege, the plaintiffs, that class members generally worked over 40 hours per week without receiving overtime pay and labored in dangerous conditions. The workers claimed that the agricultural industries was powerful while the agricultural workers were poor, and the exemption was racially motivated to impact the Latinx population, which constitutes nearly 100% of Washington dairy workers. Consequently, the workers argued that the agricultural exemption for overtime pay violates Article 1, Section 12 of the Washington State Constitution because it grants a privilege or immunity to the agricultural industry pursuant to a law implicating a fundamental right to citizenship, the right of all workers in dangerous industries to receive workplace health and safety protection. And so this court brief page is a little difficult to use. The keyword scanning here doesn't work all that well, or really very well at all. It works much better if you use a case number. And so if you type in the case number, you can pull the briefs for the case. In this case, we're going to be looking at the National Employment Law Project, United Farm Workers, and a few other partners brief, which is an amici brief, and see how this statistical and economic data was inserted into briefing in a way then that appears to be pretty persuasive to the majority in this case. And so I'm going to scroll down here. Page 5. Excuse me while I scroll. Okay, so the heading is overtime work in the agricultural industry significantly escalates the peril to employees working in an already dangerous industry. That's important, just as an aside, to note the reason this is legally significant is to get strict scrutiny under the Privileges and Immunity Clause analysis, you have to implicate a fundamental right. And Article 2, Section 35 of the Washington Constitution reads, protection of employees. The legislature shall pass necessary laws for the protection of persons working in mines, factories, or other employments dangerous to life or deleterious to health, and fix pains and penalties for the enforcement of the same. So our Constitution gives a right to safety inside the Constitution. Look at the way this is argued. Agriculture is consistently regarded by experts as one of the most, if not the most dangerous industry in the United States. Drop a footnote. Here's OSHA, US Department of Labor, proving the point, right? Agricultural workers risk high rates of occupational injuries with the incident rate nearly twice as high as the rate for workers overall. Drop a footnote. Agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting had a rate of 5 incidents per 100 full-time equivalent workers compared to 2.8, Bureau of Labor statistics, and extremely high rates of fatal injury. Agricultural, forestry, and hunting workers die from injuries at a rate 6 times higher than the rate for workers overall, and significantly higher than the rates in other dangerous occupations, such as construction or warehousing or transportation. Drop a footnote. And again, we're citing Bureau of Labor statistics. Fatal injury rates 3.5 per 100,000 full-time equivalent. Rate for warehousing and transportation is 15.1. Rate for construction is 9.5. Fatal rate for agriculture is 23 per 100,000. In 2017, these workers had the highest rate of fatal workplace injury of any private industry, with agriculture accounting for 78% of those deaths. Again, drop a footnote, Bureau of Labor statistics. And so you can see the effectiveness here. Oh, and then I'm sorry, let's not forget this. 39 agricultural workers died in the job from 2012 to 2017. And this one is Washington specific, and again, Bureau of Labor statistics. And so we're effectively crafting a narrative using really good statistical sources that agriculture is fundamentally dangerous. And we're doing that to attach it to that constitutional argument. They go into specifics. Long hours can be debilitating and deadly for crop workers. CDC reports between 92 and 2006, 68 agricultural workers died on the job from heat stroke. Although some states, including Washington, require cool-down breaks, access to water and shade, enforcement agencies have found that more than half the farms audited did not follow the rules. And then serious illnesses also result from heat stress, pesticide exposure, soil-borne fungal infections. We can go on. I don't want to take the time. I don't want to belabor the point. It's simply great advocacy, effective use of statistics. And we're going to see that the court is reading those statistics and using that information, that trusted source information in effective ways. So let's go on to the Washington Supreme Court and Court of Appeals opinions page. This search works better than the brief search does. You can type in a keyword here. De Ruyter is a wonderful keyword. I already pulled it up, but something that's very unique is going to hone right in. If we type in agriculture, we're going to get swamped. Be smart with your keywords. Martinez-Cuevas is a pretty good keyword too. Here's the slip opinion. So this is, again, a 5-4 decision. Justice Gonzalez wrote a concurrence in this decision that was joined as well. Let's go down and take a look at Justice Madsen's arguments. And so on page 12, she goes straight to this question of dangerousness, of safety, and the statistics underlying it. You heard Justice Gonzalez do it orally, in oral argument. Let's look at it in writing. So de Ruyter milkers constitute the type of workers protected by Article 2, Section 35, that safety in the workplace section, because they worked long hours in conditions dangerous to life and deleterious to their health. De Ruyter milking facilities were operated around the clock in order to service 3,000 cows. The employment policy required milkers to stay until all cows were milked and to help clean the barn unless excused early. Martinez-Cuevas, Aguilar, and the class as a whole worked over 40 hours per week. Over 80% of the time they were employed by de Ruyter. Moreover, dairy work is some of the most hazardous in the United States. 2015, the injury rate for Washington's dairy industry was 121% higher than all other state industries combined, 19% higher than the entire agricultural sector. Milkers were exposed to physical strains, respiratory hazards, toxic chemicals, risk of contracting diseases, injuries from animals. This exposure led to cancer, respiratory disease, neurological conditions. Martinez Cuevas, Aguilar both suffered injuries while working on the farm. Overtime work is particularly injurious, resulting in increased injuries, illness, and mortality. 60% or 61% higher injury hazard rate. The writer does not dispute that the dairy industry is dangerous to the health of dairy workers. This extremely dangerous nature of dairy work entitles dairy workers to the statutory protections set out in Article 2, Section 35. And then she links it to the need to pay overtime compensation. So you can see there that the briefing, the statistical, health, workplace safety briefing is tied into the decisions. They're curious or important things to remember when using factual data during litigation. So this is, I'm not talking about facts of the case. I'm talking, well, I guess I am indirectly. I'm talking about the facts that surround the facts of the case, putting the case in the social context using statistics, using the language of the system in order to highlight truth. So in some ways, you know, we've heard great presentations in this seminar about a white majority way of legally looking at truth. Well, this is using the language of the system itself, of the government system, to illustrate why we need social change, why we need a cry for justice, why we need to speak truth to power. Early in the process, if you do your research way up front, you can use these statistics that you find, or scientific summaries, or educational theories to depose experts using Rule 12 and 32, CR 12 and CR 32. You can use it to depose government fact witnesses. You can pin people down with the information you've learned in order to force them to look at, to explain the decisions they make or the expert opinions they're rendering in light of the surrounding view of what is real and what is true. You can use it in the middle of litigation to develop a factual record at trial. So asking questions in both direct and cross-examination, using your witnesses to pull as much as you can into the record as explanatory reasons for decisions they made or understanding that they've reached. You can use it late in the litigation process in appellate briefing. It is more effective, though, if you start early, use it in the middle, and then use it late in your appellate briefing. Use it early and often. Do your research way up front at the beginning of the case. Now, the former disability rights attorney, the former public defender in me saying, hey, I don't have time. I don't have time to do this type of in-depth, difficult research. And one of your answers is ask for help. Shorten the research process by talking to somebody who does it all day, every day, and get a law librarian to help you hone in to find the best information you can find. I'm going to show you how to do it, but I'm also going to really encourage you to reach out to both our library, well, both of our libraries, but also to the academic law libraries. Reach out to anybody who will answer your reference questions. There's some basic questions you need to ask. Is the information I'm using that I find, is it authoritative? So can a court take judicial note, or appellate judge take judicial notice of this information? Justice Stevens asked some hard questions in her dissent about, hey, some of this information that the majority is basing its decision on is disputable, and we're in a summary judgment mode. And okay, I think that's well taken to really make sure that you're using information that isn't easily discarded, as being one-sided or not accurately reflecting the information that's out there, or what's on the ground, the data, the truth. So is it an authoritative source? And you can ask hard penetrating questions about both your factual data and the other side's research. You know, how was it taken? You know, how old is the information? Who's making those decisions about what gets published and included? So is it relevant? You know, we've got to, it's useless if it's irrelevant information. And then tactically, is it highly persuasive? Don't bury factual gems in a flood of facts. It's just not effective advocacy. You know, really pinpoint the data, the statistics that you need in order to craft a strong argument that doesn't, you know, bury the lead. And then I think just fundamentally, does the factual data speak truth to power? Does it promote justice? And using it effectively will do that. So let's jump to some treasure hunting for a few minutes before I turn it over to Barbara. I'm going to sound old and crotchety for just a moment. So the Fed stopped publishing one of my favorite things in the world. It's going to show just how much of a research geek I am. And they replaced it with a web phone happy, or, you know, web page, something that's very simple and looks nice and clean and doesn't allow me to find the information I need. So this is USA.gov/statistics. You can find things on this page, but there's an old tool that helps you find things more effectively, and that's the statistical abstract. So the Census has inherited statistical abstract. They stopped publishing this in 2012. So the statistics in the statistical abstract are almost 10 years old now. It published from 1878 to 2012. And then in the internet age, the feds couldn't be bothered to continue it. Boy, that makes me sound old and crotchety. That's okay, because I can still use this giant 940 2012 page 2012 statistical abstract to find the tables I need and to get to the current information, because the federal agencies are still keeping the same statistics for the most part. This is almost a key to what does the federal government have and how can you find it? Can you use the language in it? So real briefly, I'm going to show you table 659. Scroll down to it. Sorry for the dead time. So, 940 pages of statistical tables is, in and of itself, just impressive. It's everything the feds get statistics on, basically. All right. Almost there. Okay, so here's the table. Industries with the highest total case incident rates for non-fatal injuries and illnesses. And it tells you the incident rate by industry. And these are 2009 numbers, but you can look inside the Bureau of Labor Statistics webpage and get the more recent, I think it's 2016 numbers. If you know the keywords to search with that you can pull from a table like this. In Washington, I want to show just 3 statistical sources. The first one would be, actually 4. The first one is the state library. So the state library collects all Washington government publications. Back before the internet, it was much easier to collect things in print and know you had everything. It's harder now, and they do a good job of collecting the digital publications as well. But from their website, you want to go to Research Collections over here on the side, and then View All Collections. And it tells you, specific collections you can look at, but search the catalog would be the place I'd start. And it gives you, you can narrow it down. You can just check labor and industries. You can check transportation. You can focus in, or you can search everything at once. This is the type of thing you can ask a law librarian to help with, or a government librarian. There's great agency libraries as well. The next thing I want to show you is a new website. And this is sort of the non-published or not written up in what we think of as the publication data for Washington. This is the data portal, data.wa.gov, where you can get a whole data set and use, maybe you've got the skills or have an expert that's working with you to find statistical data based on a large data set. And this is the collection of the data sets. And there's, anything you can imagine that Washington government does may be in here. More narrowly focused on criminal law, the Washington State Statistical Analysis Center does crime and justice data for Washington. And you can check their publications or their data here. And then the courts have similar information for both criminal and family law. The Washington State Center for Court Research also has publications and is a great place to look for data. So these are all front end, through the front doors way to find data is going to the people who collect it or create it or gather it and publish it. The backdoor way to do this is through footnotes, is through other people's writing. And so favorite way to do this, you can use any research database. None of them are comprehensive. Sometimes you have to overlap and check multiple databases. PubMed for medical data is pretty comprehensive, but that's just medical data. Google Scholar does a little bit of everything. And so we can search for something like occupational safety, fatality, Washington State, and pull articles, some of which you can get a full PDF from here, others of which you can't because they're locked behind paywalls. These are the sorts of things you can ask us to get through interlibrary loan. So, if you need to do historical research on, occupational mortality is a book in Washington State, 1950 through 1989. We can interlibrary loan this book and get it to you. Looks like it may be available full text here. Work-related deaths in Washington State for this time period. So we can get it here. Now, but if you mind the footnotes in these articles, it will give you even more information and places to look for the statistics you need. Fatal injuries in the construction industry. So this is a paywall, it's a Wiley source. We're going to hit it, we're going to get an abstract, and then it's going to offer to sell it to us perhaps. See it not right up front, but if you give us this information, we can help you find this, mind the footnotes, find other sources, and that will give you, hopefully, the information you need. The last thing I'd like to say is check the online CVs of academics and other experts to see what they've written. One of the more effective things I did in my limited career as a lawyer before I became a law librarian was to cross-examine an autism expert on applied behavior analysis. We had a big due process hearing where the experts were clashing. We each had one of the top experts in the nation on both sides of the case. I walked in with about 25 books with yellow sticky notes where the other person's expert had published articles and cross-examined that expert using his exact language from things he'd written. That sort of in-depth, it's not statistics, some of it was, but it's more scientific and educational evidence. But that sort of in-depth research is the type of, how do you find all that? Ask a law librarian to help. And you can do effective advocacy, sort of deconstructing somebody's professional opinion on the stand. With that, I'm going to ask if there are questions. I see one in the chat.
I don't think there are any questions, Rob. There's none in the Q&A. And I think that everything in the chat seems to be administrative.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, so if you stop sharing, I will start. Okay, and I just want to double check that you can see my screen. Okay, thanks. All right, so I'm Barbara Ingstrom. I'm the executive director of the King County Law Library. And before coming to the law library, I was a law librarian and adjunct professor at Seattle U Law School for 15 years. And a lot of that work that I did at SU involved interdisciplinary research. So this is an area that I have done a lot of work with and frankly find incredibly interesting, especially for a lot of the reasons Rob was talking about, as far as, the impact that it can have in cases. And I think, Justice Gonzalez's questioning from the bench really modeled, I thought that was a great example that Rob gave, really modeled how impactful this type of research can be. So one of the things that Rob had mentioned was, hey, we don't have unlimited amounts of time here. Like, I don't even know how I would get started on this research. So what I want to do is kind of point out 3 of the sort of old saw litigation aids that are on Westlaw that can help kind of get you started and get you thinking about how you might want to approach your factual research. And the sources that I'm going to talk about have been around forever, but they're things that people just forget about when they're doing the research. When I'm teaching advanced legal research classes and I show these tools, students always say, oh my God, I wish I had known about this when I did trial ad or when I did my externship or whatever. This would have saved me so much time. So in the hopes of, not reinventing the wheel, let's take a look at some of these resources. So the first one that I want to show, and I'm going to go kind of quickly because I have limited time and there are some other things I want to show you. This is the main one I want to show you. It's called Amjur Trials. And again, it's on Westlaw, but as Rob said, if there's something that you want us to help you find, just reach out to us. We can see what Amjur Trials has available, or you can come into the law library and search Amjur Trials yourself. So Amjur Trials is essentially, when I describe it to people, I say it's almost like having a trial in a box. So it's a really nice starting point for litigation because it can help you kind of set a framework for what you need to do as far as that factual research. So there are about 16 topical areas, and you could click on any of these and start, kind of looking to see if there was a relevant article, or you could just run a search on your issue. So I'm just going to do this search for overtime agricultural workers, and it's hit or miss, right? Yeah, you may find a relevant article, you may not, but this is, for me, well worth checking. So you can see this first hit is Litigation of Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act. And just to use this as an example to show you what sorts of things which would be available in a Amjur Trials article. Starting with the article outline, it gives you kind of a general discussion of the legal issue. It's talking about that for this particular article, since it's based on an act, it's going to break down the act really into very granular detail and tell you, even the statutory construction of the act, how it applies, what the protections are, private right of action, penalties, waivers, all that sort of thing. So just from the beginning, like you get sort of the cliff notes of, okay, like I before you even read the act, you can kind of get the general gist of the most salient points of it. And next, the elements and proof of claim. What are the elements of the claim and, elements of a retaliation claim? So that, again, can be very helpful because you can just start out like, okay, these are the elements that I need to be looking at. But what I wanted to kind of point out as far as our, discussion today of finding factual information for litigation is in this trial practice section. It starts right, like I said, trial in a box. It starts with client intake and interview and case investigation. And so it starts from that very early stage. And as we were talking about, identifying like the areas you actually need to do research in, this can be extremely helpful. And, so saying like, obtaining proof of terms and conditions of employment or visual representation of workplace. Of some of the things that Rob touched on. So this would kind of give you a heads up, governmental resources of information, use of FOIA requests, public databases. So kind of giving you ideas like, okay, use the Department of Labor website, things like that, internet and online resources. So it can give you ideas of where to start. And then it also has, things like, hey, contact nonprofit associations that work with these attorneys. So this can be a very, and none of this stuff is rocket science, but it's just to get you like, okay, I have a little checklist now of things that I want to go through to start out with. So that can be a very helpful resource. And then just as far as the factual information, but even beyond that, going through the case, so beyond the trial practice, case investigation, it really does go through every aspect of the case. So, talking about the parties, the plaintiffs, the defendants, it'll have pleadings and sample pleadings, like answers, complaints, all that geared to the specific fact situation. So that, again, can be very, very helpful. Discovery and disclosure, things like sample demand letters and things like that. So again, it can just, if especially if it's an area that's new to you, this can be very comforting to see, okay, this gives me a pretty good roadmap of where I need to go with this research. So I would highly recommend, if you can find an article on point, it is going to be incredibly helpful to just get you started and to give you starting points for each aspect of the litigation. And then down here talking about damages, costs, relief, all that. So it really does cover everything and even on to the appeal. Rob talked a bit about kind of following up with citations, that they're within this, since it's a West product, all these are going to be West citations, but there is a section on research references and can kind of key right into the digest to find cases, ALRs, if there are any relevant ALR articles you'd want to look at, treatises or practice aids, other trial strategy materials, forms, and then if there are, relevant law reviews and things like that. So again, just that whole citation chasing string that you can go through is they make it pretty seamless. So that is AMDR trials. And I think as for this, for what we're talking about today, that probably is the most helpful as far as kind of thinking about, early, Rob talked about how factual research kind of plays out during the different timeframes of the case. And, you know, like he said, do things early. Make sure you start this factual research early. And this will be a great tool to help you kind of narrowly tailor that research early on and get you pointed to some relevant resources right away. Another tool that I really like is called Causes of Action. And so on Westlaw, you can just start typing in causes of action and it'll autocomplete down here and bring up the treatise. And again, you can I'm just going to use that same search for everything. So what Causes of Action does really is it has an outline of a, okay, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Well, I'll go back up to this. But it essentially will give you kind of what the prima facie case is, but then also if there are any other related or alternative actions. So, you know, what's the main cause of action? And then what potentially could be some related actions. So that's just to get your head around sort of what you're, you know, what you might kind of look at generally and what would be the main cause of action, but also kind of, okay, in the alternative, what else is there? So this can be a really helpful tool if you're trying to sort of get your head around like how you want to present the case. And again, this if we look at this has an outline and an action guide. The action guide's really nice because it just kind of lays out the case, the defenses, parties, potentially liable parties, the procedure, jurisdiction, limitations, proof, remedies, and recovery. So it's essentially like the Cliff Notes to a case for this subject matter. And that's the short guide. If we go back up to the top, there's again an article outline just like the other one that goes into more detail. So you could see, you know, when you're looking at some of these areas, what would be, you know, the more cumulative, the larger discussion of the issue. And then for every analytical section, they're going to have tons of citations to case law. And they usually break, you can see here, they usually break it down by jurisdiction. So it makes it pretty easy to find cases within your jurisdiction, or to know what the cases, what jurisdictions have litigated this. And then the other West product I wanted to show you, that's the, you know, old, it's been around forever, but people tend to forget about it, is Proof of Facts. And it's also an AmJur product. So Proof of Facts is aimed at the party with the burden of proof, and it helps you know, kind of what we're talking about today, helps you figure out what do you need to kind of allege or prove, cultural worker, for your case. And with these articles, again, you know, these tend to have, so there's proof of unpaid overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And this, again, could help you sort of think about what research you're going to need to do, what you're going to need to prove. So here we've got common law claims, what potential causes of action would be under common law, and then under statutory law, what the elements would be. So that, again, can be very helpful of laying out kind of, you know, what the potential, what you would need to prove, and then, how the common law or the statutory law would apply. Again, these really helpful, very practitioner-oriented sections where they have checklists of damages, checklists of factors. So, going through and making it very easy to kind of see what you would need to prove or what damages might be available. And again, they also have kind of these illustrative documents and pleadings. So sample complaint, sample answer, and those are geared, that language will be geared to that particular cause of action. So that would be, those three things, kind of, if you remember nothing else from that, it's kind of, don't reinvent the wheel. If you're going into litigation, just, either take the time to kind of look at those, or give our library or Rob's library a call and say, hey, do you know if there's a cause of action or amateur trials or something on this particular topic, and we can help you out with that. The next thing, going fairly quickly because we only have about 10 minutes, I wanted to talk about another database called Heinonline. And when Rob was talking about basically taking advantage of citations to find more statistical information, sometimes law review articles themselves will have pretty great statistical information. So say you were doing research on felon disenfranchisement, and you came across this article and you're like, oh my God, this is great. This article has a ton of statistical information. And you may have seen this when you're doing research on Westlaw, is it'll say tabular or graphic material set forth at this point not displayable. So the thing is, when a lot of times when you're doing research on Westlaw and you find those great articles that do actually have a lot of original statistical research, you can't get the information, and it's very frustrating. So, if we went through this, there's some of the tables show, but then a lot of it, it's the information is not displayable. So the antidote for that is to go to Heinonline. At the King County Law Library, we have Heinonline available remotely. So if you go to kcll.org, click on remote databases, and then go down here to Heinonline, you can log in. The username and the password are right there. I've got it already pre-saved in my browser, so it's just going to go straight on, but it would ask you to put those in. And then you can go to the Law Journal Library. Now, when you use Heinonline, you can actually see the full text of an article. So what Heinonline does is scan the articles. I want to show you a little trick to using Heinonline. If you're starting with a citation, this citation navigator can be great. And I'm going to type the citation in incorrectly, actually, just so you can see how it works. So 109 and then abbreviation. So it's California Law Review. I'm just going to do CA Law Review. And then the page number. And then you can see it's saying, okay, you didn't put the citation in right, but I think this is what you mean. And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to put Cal instead of CA. So that has saved my bacon numerous times when I've had kind of a bad site. So just kind of use that little trick if you're having the citation navigator, which is right here, if you're having any issues. So I will go directly to one of the pages that had non-displayable information. So page 178. This said not displayable on Westlaw. You can see here, you can see the whole, you can see the full chart. And as we page through all these other charts that were not displayable, you can actually see the statistical information. So that is a very, very useful tool for seeing charts and other information that won't display. And in that article, there was even a picture. There were some photographs that would not display on Westlaw, and those displayed here. One of the articles that when I first found, like, oh, this works so well on Heinonline, when I was trying to find something on Westlaw, was an article about Darfur. And it was a photo essay in a law review, and the pictures were just like heartbreaking and heart-rendering. And it's the sort of thing where that would be a fabulous thing to be able to include in a brief or something like that, because pictures are very evocative. So just be aware that if you ever have something where there's an image that you need to have available and you want it through an authoritative source like a law review, Heinonline is a great tool. One other thing I want to show, database that I want to show you on Heinonline is, so I'll go here, is the national, it's like basically a 50-state survey database. It is called the National Survey of State Laws. And if we go over here, it's the National Survey of State Laws. And so if you ever have to do, as part of your analysis, you want to do comparative research about how the law is playing out in different states, this can be a fabulous tool. So for instance, if we were looking at this, say we would choose employment law, and then maybe we would look, there's nothing super specific to that particular case that we were looking at, but we could, minimum wage. And what this does is creates a chart of every state's law. And shockingly, I didn't realize Alabama had no statutory minimum wage. But the other thing that's interesting here is, they break it down to sub minimum wage per hour. And that might get more into, agricultural workers if they're, if they are able to pay sub minimum wages for those particular classes of workers. So again, the national surveys of state laws can be extremely helpful. Another database that I love on Heinonline that we don't subscribe to is called the Subject Compilations of State Laws, and that is a great database for doing comparative analysis of statutes. But pay attention here. This is a very little tricky backdoor way to get into that Subject Compilations of State Laws. So within this National Survey of State Laws database, if you click on this link right here, Related Subject Compilations of State Laws, and then I'm going to click on farm workers. So this is taking you into that Subject Compilations of State Laws. And this is a fabulous database that Cheryl Nyberg from the University of Washington puts together. And essentially what she does is she collects law reviews, other articles, governmental agencies, any kind of information source that does comparative analysis of statutes, she collects by subject matter. So this, to be able to find this statistical information broken down by subject matter, and then usually pretty easily obtainable through law reviews and things, it's an amazing tool. So I would highly recommend that you go ahead and use, try and get in that back door of the subject compilations of state laws through the 50-state survey database. And it looks like I'm just about out of time. I think it's almost 11 right now, but in the last minute I have, I'd like to show you.
That's my fault. I took too much time. Sorry, Barbara.
No worries. I just wanted to show what was available on the Seattle Public Libraries, because as Rob said, a lot of this research is going to be multidisciplinary research. It's not necessarily going to be law reviews. The data, if you don't remember any other databases from the public library, Proquest is the best database for finding law review interdisciplinary scholarship. So Rob had mentioned, hey, if you're looking on Google Scholar, sometimes you'll get the PDF of the full text, sometimes you won't. This Proquest is a great place to look. It will have a lot of full text articles. And what you can do too is you can limit your search to peer-reviewed articles and full text articles. So it's incredibly helpful. And then, as with any new database, I would always recommend that you use the search tips, because that can be such a time saver. And my one last tip, sorry for running over a minute or two, but my one last tip is when you're using the Proquest research library, first try your search just in the abstract. Because if you think about like how you're going to find relevant information, you want to search the smallest part of a database that's still going to give you good information. An abstract is a very information-rich part of a database. So basically, if your words show up in an abstract, you can be pretty confident that that article is going to be relevant. So that is my last tip. Use the abstract, use Proquest, and call us if you have questions on anything, because we're research nerds, and we would love to dig in and help with your research. So I will turn it over to Rob or moderator if we have any questions or anything like that. But I feel
yes, Barbara, did you see the one question in the Q&A? Someone asking about the password to Heinonline?
It's the Heinonline password is, if you click on kcll.org, it's right there on the page.
Great.
And if anyone needs help, just call and we can totally walk you through.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so very much. That does conclude this 10 a.m. session. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us.